Welcome to the Moral of the Story podcast, a show in which two cousins, a Harvard lawyer and a Baptist pastor, discuss good stories and explore their moral and ethical meanings from a Christian perspective. I'm the pastor, Colin Trisler. She's the lawyer, Evie Brydup. And Evie, today we're going to continue our discussion of Jane Austen's timeless novel, Pride and Prejudice. And in this episode, we're going to cover chapters 41 through 52. And the theme of this section is the discovery of a person's true character. And that's a theme that runs throughout the whole story, but it really comes to the fore in these chapters. You're seeing past the surface, beyond the posturing that people do, and seeing people for who they truly are, and being willing to have your opinions changed about a person's character for better or worse. And we're going to pick up here, chapter 41. With the Bennet family kind of living up to its less than exemplary reputation. Elizabeth's family, particularly Mrs. Bennet, Kitty, and Lydia, in their course of conversations, they all share the common sense of self-centeredness. And that causes a lot of drama and a lot of turmoil in their family. And then Lizzie and Mr. Bennet are discussing Lydia. And this is what Mr. Bennet says of Lydia here, okay? Her father, obviously. Lydia will never be easy till she has exposed herself in some public place or other, and we can never expect her to do it with so little expense or inconvenience to her family as under the present circumstances. And Elizabeth, to Mr. Bennet, regarding Lydia accompanying Mrs. Forster to Brighton, she says, "If you, my dear father, will not take the trouble of checking her exuberant spirits and of teaching her that her present pursuits are not to be the business of her life, she will soon be beyond the reach of amendment." In other words, if you don't step in and provide some leadership here, these bad habits are going to become ingrained into Lydia's character. Her character will be fixed, Elizabeth says, and she will, at 16, be the most determined flirt that ever made herself and her family ridiculous. A flirt, too, in the worst and meanest degree of flirtation, without any attraction beyond youth and a tolerable person, and from the ignorance and emptiness of her mind, wholly unable to ward off any portion of that universal contempt which her rage for admiration will excite. And I really like that phrase. I think that describes Lydia perfectly, her rage for admiration. We're going to talk later on. Lizzie says that Lydia just wanted attention, and she would go with whatever man gave her attention. And it could change. It could fluctuate. She was very whimsical. She just wanted to be the center of attention. And she's a determined flirt, and a flirt in the worst way. And Lydia doesn't have, this is in her own family too. She doesn't have the best reputation in her own family. You know,
in her own family.
Her own family. These are the people that God has ordained for her to love her the most. And they'd have basically no respect for her. And Mr. Bennet, and all right, Evie, so I'm going to toss it to you here. Lydia, well, explain to us Lydia's personality so we can know where we're going. And then Mr. Bennet, part of that is part of the bad points of her personality. Part of that is Mr. Bennet's fault for refusing to show her the attention that maybe he should have, and refusing to step in and provide some fatherly leadership for her. What do you think about Lydia and Mr. Bennet here?
I think your theory is exactly right. I think that the idea of the rage for admiration and longing for attention, that's at the heart of her character. And she's ridiculous. She doesn't have depth. She doesn't have any sort of interior life, or she's not seeking after any kind of virtue. She's seeking admiration and the pleasure of the moment. And right now, at this point in the story, it hasn't led her into the worst places it could. But there's that potential. And I think Elizabeth sees it. I think Elizabeth doesn't even suspect how bad it could be, but she's definitely right on the money in where this is going. But it does come down to Mr. Bennet. And these are the chapters in the book where you get a little bit more explanation of what we've kind of seen throughout with Mr. Bennet, which is he was disappointed in his marriage. Instead of trying to do the right thing, he instead took his pleasures in his library and being in the country, and all things that are perfectly good, but he's put them above the higher good, which is serving his family. And I think that's to me very interesting, because you see how morality, like a compass, where you go just a couple of degrees off. He's not a vicious man. He's not someone, prone to just sort of the worst morality, but he's just a little bit off. It just takes him a little bit in the wrong direction, and you see the effects for his family. And you see it both. He's focusing on his own pleasures instead of his family, and then he's misusing his reason to excuse himself for his own behavior, like where he's making these arguments of, she's luckily too poor to be an object of prey, and she's going to expose herself in public somehow. We've just got to let her get it out of her system. Well, all this stuff, it's superficially plausible, but it's kind of funny, and we laugh at it. But he doesn't really believe that. He's saying these things to get himself off the hook for something he doesn't want to have to deal with.
Yeah, and also it seems like he just wants to get her out of the house.
Yeah.
We shall have no peace at Longbourn if Lydia does not go to Brighton. The best thing for her, Elizabeth's worried about her going out and giving the family a bad name. And Mr. Bennett says, no, we want her to go out because we don't want her here, because here is a problem. And he says, at Brighton, she will be of less importance, even as a common flirt, than she has been here. The officers will find women better worth their notice. Now, notice how he's speaking about his own daughter here. Let us hope, therefore, that her being there may teach her her own insignificance. At any rate, she cannot grow many degrees worse. She can't get much worse than she is now, he says, without authorizing us to lock her up for the rest of her life. Evie, what kind of... Now, Leah as an individual is responsible for her own behavior. However...
Sure, yeah.
When you take on the responsibility of having children, you are answerable for how your children turn out. And what kind of father speaks this way about his daughter in such a hopeless tone? He's let her become someone else's responsibility, because I don't want to take on the responsibility of actually doing the job of raising my child up in the way that she should be raised. And I think that Mr. Bennett plays, he's got his own stuff that he's going to have to answer for not doing his job as a husband and a father in his household here with Lydia. And he's just given up on her. Yeah.
And it's not the case of a parent who doesn't see what their child is actually like. I mean, he sees exactly what she's like. I guess he doesn't anticipate what's going to happen, but he has a pretty good measure of her character, but he just chooses not to deal with it.
Right. Yes.
And some of the things he says they're not totally false, like the idea she's going to go into a public place, she's going to find out she isn't really that important. But it's like he doesn't stop to think, well, maybe the reason she's so eager to be thought important is because I don't treat her like she's important. I mean, maybe she's not important in Brighton. She should be important in her own home, and she's not. That's at the heart of the problem for me.
Yeah, and that's why she's out there attention seeking. It's because her father regards her with such an insignificant, just writing her off kind of tone. And if she's not getting that from her father, she is going to go chase after any man who's willing to give her attention. And like we said, in previous episodes when we talked about Lydia, that's a recipe for disaster for a young lady. It's not going to end well. It's not. And of course it doesn't end well for her. It could have been worse, but she's stuck with some, dirtbag like Wickham, and he's stuck with Lydia Bennett, so, and I do blame Lydia for that. And I do blame Mr. and Mrs. Bennett for that too, but I primarily blame Mr. Bennett for that, for taking such a hands-off approach to his own household. And Elizabeth, I think she kind of recognized that too. Mr. Bennett, we've talked about Mr. and Mrs. Bennett and the attitude they have toward each other. He had made her an object of contempt. He had made Mrs. Bennett an object of contempt for himself. He exposed his wife to the contempt of her own children, making a joke of her. And Austen wrote, Elizabeth, however, had never been blind to the impropriety of her father's behavior as a husband. She had always seen it with pain. And, Elizabeth saw that her father was not the man that he should be. He was not the father that he should be. And it always gave her a sense of pain at seeing that. And, her family has a certain reputation, and, Elizabeth's not that way. Jane doesn't seem to be that way. But these other ladies are really dragging the Bennett name through the mud, and Mr. Bennett's letting them get away with it.
Yeah, I mean, with Mrs. Bennett, there's the excuse that she doesn't really know better herself. But Mr. Bennett, he does know better, and he's just choosing to detach from it.
Right.
It's not my problem. I've got a 16-year-old who's flirting with every man in sight. It's not my problem.
Yeah, and that's almost the attitude it takes. Let her go. Let her become somebody else's problem. Let somebody else deal with it. And in real life, a man is going to have to answer to God if he takes that attitude toward his family, because God has put those children and your family in your possession with the intentions of you giving them what they need, being the man that they need you to be. And now this is obviously a story, but we're going to pull lessons from this. And this sort of attitude should wake every man up. We're going to have to answer for how we raise our family. I'm going to stand face to face with Jesus Christ one day, and he's going to, you knew me, and he's going to say, we knew each other. We had a relationship. I know who you are. Okay. I'm a pastor of a church, but he's not going to ask me about my church first. He's going to ask me about me and him. And then he's going to say, let's talk about your family. And I'm going to have to answer for how I've raised my family. And Mr. Bennett is going to have to, if he were a real person, he's going to have to answer for how he raises his family. And I see somebody like Mr. Bennett and the hands-off approach he takes to being a husband and a father, and that motivates me to not be that way. I have to be careful to not take the same disinterested hands-off approach as Mr. Bennett does. In my book, I wrote that being laissez-faire is a good attitude when it comes to the state and its relationship with its citizens. Okay, but a laissez-faire family cannot work. You have to be involved, hands-on. Not hands-off, but hands-on with your family. That doesn't mean being a tyrant or a helicopter parent, but it means being involved in every area of your family's life, striking that balance between knowing when to really get involved and when to kind of take a step back. And that's constant work. It is a daily, minute-by-minute responsibility. And, you said in the last episode that we're all a little silly sometimes, and one of the benefits you get from reading Pride and Prejudice has helped me to realize, I act silly sometimes too, and I shouldn't, and I mean silly in a bad way. And one of the things I get from it, I see Mr. Bennett and the harm that his hands-off approach to family has caused to his family, and it motivates me to, be more involved with my wife and my children.
Well, I appreciate hearing that too, and I think that's probably a good lesson for all of us, whatever duties are in front of us. What I take from Mr. Bennett is these small decisions you make on a day-to-day basis. Like, I'm going to go to my library and I'm going to read my book instead of engaging with my daughters. They seem like not a big deal at the time. It's not like I'm going to go out and murder someone or I'm going to go out and steal things, but it's choosing things that are just a little bit, maybe even something, like I said, something that's good, but you're choosing it over something that you were supposed to prioritize. Maybe you do it once or twice. We all do this, to some extent. But over the course of years, it shapes things in ways that we didn't anticipate. I mean, what you do each day, little small things, they build up. And if you take a big duty and you neglect it over time like that, you end up with a daughter like Lydia. And he's put his own comfort ahead of her good. And it's gotten to the point that he doesn't want to have her in the house. It's painful to him. He doesn't like it. It's unpleasant to have her around. He's not willing to put himself through the discomfort to do what he needs to do for his daughter. And he still has that duty. If he had gone back when she was younger and done the right thing day by day, it would be a lot easier now. But that doesn't get him off the hook. He's got a 16-year-old. He's got to deal with this. He's not going to do it. He's going to go to his library. He's going to close the door. Not my problem.
And that's the attitude that you have to take to parenting. You nailed it exactly right. You have to take a day-by-day approach. life isn't made up of big moments. There are big moments in life, but life is made up of these small moments. And you have to think long term with your life, and especially with the life of your family. And, my kids sometimes they'll say, they don't say this, but it seems like maybe sometimes I'm making a big deal out of something that's small. And I'm firmly of the attitude, I know what I'm doing. I'm not flying off the handle. I'm making a big deal about this when it's small so that I don't have to fight from behind when I've let it get out of control and try to get it when it's big. I like what
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson said. Everybody's going to have dragons in their lives. Dragons cause chaos and they cause trouble and they destroy things. He said, everybody's going to have dragons that get into their lives. You want to kill the dragon when it's a baby, when
Yeah.
if you're able to handle it. And when it's small, you don't want to feed the dragon and let it grow into this huge monster that now you are at the disadvantage because this monster now outsizes you. And so it's almost impossible to kill the dragon when it's big. So you want to get it when it's small. And that's the approach we have to take to problems in life. It's much easier to solve a smaller problem than it is a bigger problem. And sometimes big problems get dropped in your lap. That's the way the world works. But a lot of problems, if we just took the effort to stop and think, and we think long term, and we don't just take the easy route, but we take the responsible route, and we kill the dragons when they're babies, that's the way that a wise father, a wise parent would approach it, approach his family. And Mr. Bennett has not done that. He's instead, like you said, chosen to put comfort over his duties as a father and as a husband. And now he's paying the price for it with Lydia. I mean, look at her. I mean, I understand why he wants her to leave. I mean, I wouldn't want to be around her either. I'm not saying she's innocent and that this is all his fault. It's not. I understand exactly why he wants her to go. But this is your daughter you're talking about. And, as we'll get into Lydia more later when she gets involved with Wickham. So we'll talk about her. But I don't feel sorry for Wickham. Well, there's a little part of me that feels sorry for Wickham. I know he married Lydia for the absolute wrong reasons. I know that he was a predatory and all this other stuff. But just as a man, there is a small part of me that feels bad knowing that guy is married to Lydia Bennett. And if he ever stopped and thought about it, I think he would just realize that sinking feeling. I'm married to this woman forever, and so that's the only little bit of sympathy that I have for Wickham is the fact that he's married to her. So, that's my opinions about Mr. Bennett and Lizzie. And Lizzie sees this. It's amazing that Lizzie is as perceptive and is as wise and is as normal and socially adept as she is, because Lydia's gone in a completely opposite direction. But Elizabeth has seen the weaknesses and has chosen what not to be, and that's what bad examples do. God allows bad examples into our lives. A fool is going to follow the bad example. A wise man, a wise woman is going to see the bad example and learn what not to do. And sometimes learning what not to do is just as important as learning what to do. You know what I mean? Don't you think?
That's true. That's true. That's what I like about this example. I agree with you about Wickham. I mean, he absolutely deserves what he gets.
Yes.
And in fact, ending up married to Lydia is really better than what he deserves. But at the same time, of course, he's an intelligent man. I mean, this is someone Elizabeth had enjoyed talking to and, had regarded as, a good companion, someone you can converse with.
Right.
And Lydia is silly. I mean, even with all the parental attention in the world, she was probably always going to tend to be silly, and that's why Mr. Bennett didn't take as much interest in her. I mean,
yes,
Elizabeth has benefited a lot from the fact that she was naturally intelligent, and so Mr. Bennett respected her and took an interest in her. And Lydia didn't have the natural talents, but that shouldn't make any difference. It's his daughters.
Yes, and you have to accept. And we talked about this, earlier as well.
Yeah,
I have weaknesses, and yet my family still loves me. And I have to be aware that my wife has weaknesses and my children have weaknesses. And just because, they have weaknesses doesn't mean that I reject them totally because I don't want to deal with their weaknesses. You have to take the good with the bad. And it's the parent's job to help, iron out those weak wrinkles in your children's character. And because if you don't, you've got this attention hungry, common flirt like Elizabeth. I mean, like Lydia, and she brings, disgrace upon the family. And so, all right, you got anything else you want to say about Lydia here? We're going to get into her and Wickham a little bit later. So there's plenty to say about her, but anything else you want to say at this point?
No, I don't. I really have, I guess, one more thing about Elizabeth. I think that Mr. Bennet has been a pretty decent father to Elizabeth because he has taken an interest in her. If you ever read Mansfield Park, there's a character in Mansfield Park named Mary. I think this is kind of an example of what Elizabeth could have been with, really poor parenting, no instruction and good morals at all. So that was just, just kind of as a side note, I think that Austen shows us different examples of what people could become. You have certain natural traits, and the best in you can be brought out, or the worst in you can be brought out. And I think with that, some of her different characters in the different books, they're very interesting because you get people with natural tendencies that are similar, but they come out differently because of the environment they're in. And I think that's true to life.
That's exactly true. And that's why it's so important to be involved with your children as a parent, because you have to spot those natural bad inclinations that your children have. And you have to spot them in yourself first, and you have to be able to spot them in your children. And you have to actively say, okay, my child is capable of this. I do not want him or her to be consumed by this bad habit that's in their character. So we have got to work hard to deal with this now, so that by the time he's older, by the time she's a teenager or whatever, you've learned how to get a handle on these bad influences, these wrinkles in our character. And you don't want to dwell on it. You don't want to discourage your children, but you want to let them know, look, you're capable of this. I do this with myself too. I'm prone to do this, and I'm not about to tell anybody here what I'm prone to do that's bad. And, but I'm aware of what I'm capable of, and as a parent, you have to be aware of what your children are capable of, and you have to work that out of them, or at least give them the tools they need, the wisdom they need to get a handle on it. All right, so we're moving away from Lydia and her attitude. We'll get into that later. Now we get to something a little more beautiful, a little more nice. And this is Elizabeth's visit to Pemberley, Darcy's estate here. And Elizabeth, now when we last left off with Elizabeth, she had absolutely rejected Darcy's proposal. And we talked about that in depth, and I thought very well. We made some good points about that. And so that's where we are in the aftermath here. So they want to go just take a visit of the estate just to see its grandeur and its beauty, right? And Elizabeth wants to avoid Darcy. And so she agrees to go when she learns that he's not going to be there, right? And then, so Pemberley is this large and handsome estate, Lizzie admired the house and its furnishings. She admired Mr. Darcy's taste, that it was neither gaudy nor uselessly fine, with less of splendor and more real elegance than the furniture of Rosings. And this place, she thought, I might have been mistress. That thought crossed her mind, And instead of viewing these rooms as a stranger, I might have rejoiced in this place as my own. And then I would have been able to welcome my aunt and uncle here. And then she says, but no, so those thoughts creep into Elizabeth's mind. And she, realizes that she's thinking that way. And she says, no, that could never have been. That wasn't meant to be. My uncle and aunt they would have been lost to me, if I had come here. And I should not have been allowed to invite them. And it says this was a lucky recollection, Austen said. It saved her from something like regret, and regretting from marrying Darcy because of the provision and the status he could have offered her. And look, I respect Elizabeth Bennet, And I love the fact that Jane Austen, that's a completely normal and human reaction. She turned Darcy down, but then she gets in there and she sees all this nice stuff, and she said,
Mhm.
this all could have been mine. Imagine living
Mhm.
here. And she kind of thinks that way. And that's a real person. That's a real reaction. And then
Yeah.
she bats it out of her mind. No, can't think that way. And so what do you think here about Elizabeth? Regret's not really her style. You know what I mean? I wouldn't say regret. If there's something that she feels bad about, she's kind of the type to go take care of it rather than just sit and stew in her regret. And so she doesn't allow regret to seep in. She says, we've moved on. What do you think about Elizabeth's attitude here?
Well, I mean, first of all, this is my favorite chapter in the whole book, just because, I mean, first of all, I like the description of the house. I like imagining it. I
Yes.
mean, it's kind of just a dream home. It's in the country, and it's surrounded by woods and hills, and it sounds beautiful. And I just love to read about it. But I like what's going on here because, first of all, she's seeing the splendor of it. I mean, and I do think some of it is just that sort of worldly wealth. Like, she knew he was wealthy on paper, but then you see the actual home, and it's real. Like, no, this is just a really fabulous house. This is something so far beyond. But I don't think that's all there is to it. I think that she's seeing his character. She's seeing his taste. I mean, the house is not grander than Rosings. She's seeing like who he really is. You have this furniture. It's beautiful, but it's not for show. I mean, and I was reminded when he said, "We neither of us perform to strangers," and you see that in his house.
Yes,
he shows that he likes things that are beautiful, that have integrity and are well made, but they're not to show off to other people. It's because he wants to have a comfortable home for himself and his sister. And I think that both of those things are going on. I mean, I do think part of it is just seeing the reality of the wealth, sure. But I think that what's also going on is she's getting an idea sort of his heart. I mean, they haven't had these emotional conversations. She doesn't really understand who he is on the inside. And you see his home and the choices he's made. I think she's starting to kind of understand more about who he is. And she likes that. But at the same time, she doesn't fully trust him yet either. And so I think there's a lot going on here, and I love it.
I love the fact that she complimented his taste.
Yeah, right.
I just thought anytime a man has good taste, he's not just some slob of a bachelor or something like that. I mean, he's actually put some thought into his home, and where he lives. And like you said, the stuff he has around him, it's nice. He wants to be able to provide. He doesn't want to show off for other people. He wants things that are going to last and that look nice and provide a good home for him and his sister, who he has great affection for. And then the housekeeper there, and I really liked the interaction with Elizabeth and the housekeeper, because it was kind of funny because the housekeeper does just, she has a very high opinion of Darcy, and Elizabeth's kind of like, Darcy, are we talking about the same guy here? And then she's kind of like, well, of course you would say that. You work for the man, and so she, I really like that interaction there. And she didn't know, when they asked about Darcy, being married one day, and the housekeeper said that she didn't know if anyone was good enough for Mr. Darcy to marry. And Elizabeth's just kind of like, are we talking about the same guy? And so she's suspicious of her opinions. I'm sure that you should think so. Elizabeth said something like that, because you're work for him. And the housekeeper, she said, I say no more than the truth and what everybody will say that knows him. And that's what it is. She truly knows Darcy. She's been there with him since he was a boy. And she said that he was a very nice and considerate boy. And he's grown into a, considerate man too. And that's, again, knowing somebody's true character, seeing past all the opinions of other people and all the posing and all the, maybe negative social tendencies we all have, and getting down to the core of who people are. And Elizabeth, I think, is now starting to see that Darcy is a much better man than she gave him credit for. And this kind of, and to her credit, she's open-minded about the whole thing, and she starts to allow her opinion of Darcy. Well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was wrong about him. And a cynical person would say, you work for the man. Of course you're going to. I don't believe you for a second. But Elizabeth, and she thinks that way, but then she allows, well, let's take in the evidence here. And I'm willing to have my mind changed. And I think that says a lot about her. What do you think about this whole thing?
I think so too. I mean, because she started the story and she took pride in her ability to size people up. And you can meet somebody, and she's met him a couple times, and she's pretty sure she's got an accurate sketch of what his character is. And she's by this point realized, well, maybe somebody who's known him for 25 years maybe has a better idea than I had from that one time I met him at the ball. You know, I think that's the growth that she's made just within this story. I thought she started off the story as she's a good and virtuous person, but this is the story of what she's learned up to this point, that the judgment that she made, that the way she thought of somebody when she first met him that one time or even twice, just it can be wrong. And somebody that you've known for 25 years, that person's judgment is going to be more accurate. And also I think she also has to realize, well, this is someone who works for him, but that actually tells you more about his character. If he treats people who are his inferiors, and also the housekeeper says, well, he's so affable to the poor. And I think that's when she starts to realize, actually, he doesn't go out of his way among, fellow gentlemen, or when he's in good society, he doesn't really go out of his way to make himself agreeable, but he's kind and just to people who are below him in the hierarchy. He takes care of the people that he is entrusted to take care of. Like, she starts thinking about, there's some line where she realizes, well, how many people are within his guardianship, whose happiness is within his guardianship, and how well he takes care of all those people below him. That he's not out to impress people that he thinks are above him, who can do something for him. He's actually saving his effort for the people that he can help. And it just says a lot about his character. And I think she finally realizes that, coming from a servant like this, who Elizabeth can tell is an intelligent and perceptive person. This is not someone who's just an idiot who has no idea what people are like. She realizes that Mrs. Reynolds is an intelligent woman. This is really just the utmost praise that you could get for someone, that he treats his employees well.
She's been there for a long time, so she should know what Darcy's character really is. And I think you made an excellent point. That's an excellent observation I didn't even think about. But the people that work for Darcy, if they have a good opinion of him, then he must be a good person, because, I always see, you see the presidents and people like that. And then, these Secret Service people may write a book and say, do you really want to know what Hillary Clinton was really like? Do you really want to know what happened with Bill and Hillary? Ask the Secret Service guys, because they were always there and they've always got some sort of sordid tale or whatever. And, the fact that this lady, if Darcy had, tried to put on this front, but then acted a different way, in behind closed doors, she would have been the first one to say it. But the fact that she's willing to sing his praises means a lot more, that he is a good person and not just putting on a show. And I like the fact she's been with him for many, many years, and she says, I say no more than the truth. And that honestly seems like the exact kind of person Darcy would keep around for a long time. Somebody that's going to tell him the truth, because he doesn't like phonies. He doesn't like people who are going to, put on a show and all this other stuff, all this posing that people do, and some sort of kiss up or anything like that. This woman she says, I say nothing but the truth. And that's exactly the kind of person, once you get to know Darcy, that he would surround himself with. So I think she's I really liked this interaction with Elizabeth. And to Elizabeth's credit, she was willing to have her mind changed. And a lot of people don't do that, Evie, as you know. They have one interaction with somebody, and maybe that person's having a bad day, and they think they've got that whole person figured out, and based on that one interaction. I'm tempted to do it as well. but I wouldn't
Oh,
want
me too.
I wouldn't want somebody to judge me on my worst day, you know.
No.
And
Or my best day, takes it by itself.
because it can only go down, you know. If they judge me on my best day, you know, oh well, he was really great, and then well, he's not as nice this time as he was last time, you know. So we do have to be like Elizabeth and be very careful. We do have to judge people.
Mhm.
You know, the Bible is very clear. We
Yeah.
must make moral judgments. I've preached about this. People say Jesus said, "Thou shalt not judge," and or judge not lest ye be judged, and that sort of thing. And people stop at that one verse, and they never
Hmm.
take into account the whole rest of the context there. When that's where Jesus says, "Get the log out of your own eye first before you try to help your neighbor get the speck out of his eye, or help your brother get the speck out of his eye." We are to help the brother get the speck out of his eye. That means
Yeah.
we are to judge and say, you have a speck in your eye. That behavior is not right. But if we want to be able to help that person correct that behavior, then we've got to take care of our bad habits first. And we got to clean up our own room first before we start
Mhm.
criticizing the cleanliness of somebody else's house, you know? And that's what
Yeah.
Jesus is getting at there. You should make judgments, but start with yourself. And once you've got yourself in order, then you're in a place not to judge people so you can feel superior to them, but to help them with those specks that are in their eye that's obstructing their vision, to help them get that out. And again, the eye is a delicate organ, and you don't want to use aggressive and erratic tactics when you're trying to get something out of somebody's eye. So when we do help other people and we do make those judgments, we have to be very respectful and very gentle when we do that, because, an eye is a delicate organ, and when you point out somebody else's flaws, you have to be very delicate about it. And as we're going to see, later on, Elizabeth wasn't very delicate in pointing out Darcy's flaws. And again, and we'll talk more about this later when the proposal and stuff. But Darcy, to his credit, took Elizabeth's judgments and criticisms to heart, and he said,
Mhm.
"You know what? She's right about that. I really could make some improvements there." And Elizabeth
Yeah.
took this to heart. She took the house cleaner's opinions to heart, and she said, "You know what? Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I don't know this man as well as I thought I did. Maybe I don't have a good handle on his character as I thought I did." And I really like that about Elizabeth and Darcy, and anybody who's willing to admit when they were wrong, or maybe even partially wrong, or maybe jump to a conclusion or something like that. They don't just dig in and stay hidebound out of some sort of sense of pride and prejudice. They
Yeah. Right.
they are willing to admit when they're wrong, and Elizabeth does that here in her interaction with the housekeeper. I'm sorry.
Well, I think that's right. And another kind of judgment that we have to make, I mean, yeah, we shouldn't condemn people. We shouldn't say, well, this person is a bad person and I
Right.
hope they get punished for it. We should hope the best for everybody. We should want them to improve.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But as you said, sometimes we're called upon to admonish our brothers and sisters. Another type of judgment we have to make is some people aren't trustworthy.
Yes.
And
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is not asking us to trust people that we shouldn't trust.
Right.
Sometimes to navigate the world and for us to be virtuous people, we need to be able to discern who we can and cannot trust. And I think that's the point you see with Wickham, that Elizabeth has made the wrong judgment about Darcy and about Wickham.
Yes.
And she's let her manners lead her astray in both cases, where in the one case, Wickham had the pleasing manners and he was charming. And she thought, well, he's a good person. And
Yeah.
Darcy, he was offensive to her. So she thought, well, he's a bad person.
Right.
She has to learn how to make a more accurate discernment of character, maybe is the way we should put it. This is not about judging people of I'm condemning them, but you do sometimes have to make discernments about other people's character, and sometimes you're wrong, but
Yes.
we have to make these decisions sometimes.
I liked it when she said that this was praise of all others most extraordinary, most opposite to her ideas. So this praise of Darcy is counteractive to whatever Elizabeth's opinion of Darcy was. That he was not a good-tempered man had been her firmest opinion.
I love that.
And this is the man she ends up getting married to. So she's willing to have her
Firmest.
her firm. That was of all existence. Her firmest opinion was that Darcy was not a good-tempered man. And I just thought that was kind of funny. And again, it's those little bits of humor that Austen puts in there. And Elizabeth was willing to change her own mind there. And Elizabeth's opinion is much different than the housekeeper's of Darcy. Yet Elizabeth starts to soften. See, maybe there's more to this guy than I really know. And the housekeeper, as we said, she'd seen Darcy's character since childhood. And she said, if I were to go through the world, I could not meet a better employer. You know, I've always observed that they who are good-natured children are good-natured when they grow up. And he has always been the sweetest tempered, most generous-hearted boy in the world. And inside of that stately man, that generous and good-hearted boy, he's still there. And said Elizabeth almost just stared at her, like, gave her just some dumbfounded look, can this be Mr. Darcy? She thought, And then Darcy, the housekeeper goes on to compare Darcy to his father, who was an excellent man, and his son will be just like him, just as affable to the poor, And Elizabeth starts, it's her mind just kind of, blows up there, and well, this is not what I expected at all. And then I did like how that, the house, Darcy, he did have an air about him that some people mistake for arrogance. But she said he is misunderstood. And the housekeeper said there's not one of his tenants or servants, but what will give him a good name. Not one of them. Every person that works for him will have nothing but good things to say about Darcy. Some people call him proud, but I am sure I never saw anything of it. To my fancy, it's only because he doesn't rattle away like other younger men. And it's true. The people who truly know your character, and not these these people who don't really know who you are. And there's always going to be somebody who doesn't know you who wants to make judgments about you. And I really like Darcy. He just doesn't care. He doesn't care, but he's nice to the people who are in his sphere of influence there. The people who really know him, and the people who really know the man, they'll say nothing but good things about him.
And there's an implicit contrast with Mr. Bennet too, because Mr. Bennet has done the opposite of taking care of those under his guardianship. And then that's in the previous chapter. And then you go to this chapter, Mr. Darcy on his estate, and it's made very clear there are all these people who've been put under his guardianship, and he's done an excellent job taking care of them.
Yes. One
thing that I thought was kind of funny about her assuming he has a bad temper is that's not totally without basis, because he himself said, well, I do have faults of temper. He says, well, I can be resentful. Yeah. And I think she chose to interpret that in the worst way possible. What it actually showed about him is that he's in a way judgmental towards himself. He's aware of his flaws. He's more aware of his flaws maybe than other people around him are, because he keeps it under control, right? Right. So I think that's kind of interesting that he said that, and his saying that about himself actually showed his good character, but she chose to interpret it in exactly the wrong way. Right.
And I really like how the attention that Darcy gives his sister, is also brought up. And he really loves his sister, much like Lizzie and Jane. Elizabeth and Jane were close. They really had family instincts with each other. And Darcy and his sister have a similar relationship. He really goes out of his way to take care of her. The housekeeper, says that Darcy is a good brother. And this is always the way with him, she said. Whatever can give his sister any pleasure is sure to be done in a moment. There is nothing he would not do for her. And I think that's also a way that Darcy would treat his wife too. You know what I'm saying? He would show that same kind of protection and affection and provision with his wife. And you hear that all the time. How does a guy treat his mother? How does a guy treat his sister? And how does a woman, a girl, treat her father? And you can kind of look at how they treat the opposite gendered members of their family and see how they're going to treat you. You know, if I'm dating someone, when I was dating Amanda, I noticed how she treated her father, and she treated him with respect, even when she didn't agree with him. You know, she wasn't a doormat, you know, but she treated her father with respect. He was her father. And I think that says a lot about Darcy's character too. He treats his sister as somebody he takes care of, and he would treat his wife that way. And I think Elizabeth kind of is starting to see that.
I think so too, and I think there's, like I said, there's that contrast with Mr. Bennet. I mean, we see directly a man who doesn't take care of those within his charge, and there's that contrast with Lydia and Georgiana. I mean, they're the same age. They've both been prey of Wickham, and you see the difference in the outcomes. I mean, with Georgiana, the reason it didn't come to the worst with her is that she had that open relationship with her brother to tell him, well, this is what we were planning, and that's why everything came out okay, because she was a young girl. She made a foolish decision, but because she had that relationship with the brother of trust and of mutual respect and the care that he had shown for her, that's the whole difference in the outcome with Georgiana. Now, Georgiana may have had natural talents that Lydia didn't, but I mean, I do think it sets up that contrast in the way those two 16-year-old girls have been raised and how well they're taken care of. And I think Elizabeth sees that because she knows what her father is as a husband is not what she wants. And right. I think you're exactly right. She's seeing in this man, he's got the qualities that she should be looking for in a husband that her father lacks.
He's got good family instincts. Darcy does.
Yeah.
And the narrator here, so she's starting to see Darcy, and this is the scene that she starts to see Darcy in a more appealing light. And this is a very important scene because she had written him off. She was done with him. If he's going to be there, I don't want to be there. You know what I mean? But now this is she turns a corner here, and he's more appealing to her. And Austen, as the narrator, said there was certainly at this moment in Elizabeth's mind a more gentle sensation towards the original than she had ever felt in the height of their acquaintance. As a brother, as a landlord, a master, she considered how many people's happiness were in his guardianship, how much of pleasure or pain it was in his power to bestow, how much of good or evil must be done by him. He had power over these people, and he has like we talked about last episode, he has a position of influence, and he uses it for the good. You know, he treats people with respect. He helps out the poor. Wickham, as we see, he has a bad reputation. He had debts all over the place, and Darcy, without any fanfare, went and settled those debts. You know, and I just think that the fact that Darcy is in a position of power, and he uses that power for the good in a responsible way, that testifies to who he truly is as a man. I heard Milo Yiannopoulos, and you can have your opinion about him. He's, whatever. But I heard him say something that stuck with me. I read his book, and I read this stuck with me. He said, if you want to see a person's true character, you give them just a little bit of power. And if that person's a bad person, they will take whatever little bit of power they got, and they will abuse it, and they will make people's lives as miserable, and try to exert authority and control over people with whatever little power they got. But if somebody's a good person, and you give them some power, and they use it for the good, that's truly a good person. You know, and I think that's that true. Darcy, you take that paradigm, and you apply that to Darcy here. He was given a whole bunch of power, and he used it for the good. And that right there, if you want to see a person's character, he could have done good or evil. He could have done pain or pleasure, and he took care of everybody. And that speaks volumes about Darcy right there.
Yeah, it really does.
All right, so Elizabeth, at this point, Darcy's not supposed to be there, right? That's why she came. But he makes an unexpected appearance. Destiny has crossed their paths, you know? And I like that it said they were within 20 yards of each other. You know, he just, there's Darcy. I was hoping not to see him, but they were within 20 yards of each other. So abrupt was his appearance, you know, that it was impossible to avoid his sight. we've been there. When you see somebody maybe in Walmart or something and you're like, oh no, don't make eye contact, look away, and you see somebody and you make eye contact with them, you're like, ugh, I got to go talk to this person now, or something like that. Yeah, you can maybe, get away from it, but they were so close to each other and he made such a sudden appearance that there was no avoiding it. There had to be some interaction between the two. It was impossible to avoid his sight. He saw her, she saw him. Their eyes instantly met, and the cheeks of each were overspread with the deepest blush. He absolutely started. He was startled too, just as much as she was. Okay. And for a moment, he seemed immovable from surprise. So the normally, together Darcy, I don't know what to do. He's kind of deer in the headlights sort of thing. But shortly, Darcy being, the true good man, gentleman that he is, he recovers himself, he advanced toward the party. So he says, I've got to go talk to these people here. And remember, the last time he saw Elizabeth, he'd given her that letter. But, right then, she'd been pretty harsh with him. I mean, right? In her rejection of his first proposal. That's still that elephant in the room that's lingering between the two of them there. And Darcy, like you mentioned manners and politeness, he goes over and he acts with utter politeness and utter manners, right? And he was of perfect civility or something, I think is how Jane Austen put it. And so I think that says a lot about Darcy too. He's not a man who holds grudges or anything like that, What do you think?
No, and I think the shock is probably more for him because, I mean, she knew she was at his house, but,
Right.
he had no reason to expect her to be there. But there's a line that I really like where it says, he repeated his inquiries as to the time of her having left Longbourn and of her stay at Derbyshire so often and in so hurried a way as plainly spoke the distraction of his thoughts. Like, how often have you had conversations like that where you find yourself like just saying the same thing again, like the same polite question over and over because your mind is somewhere else. You're trying to be polite, but your mind is somewhere else. You're nervous. I just like that because it's so true to life.
It is.
To me.
So
it's how I would be.
Or you reword it. So how you doing? So what's going on? How is everybody? Yeah, everybody okay?
Yeah, exactly.
You run through.
How's everybody else?
Because you don't know what to say. And Elizabeth's in the same situation here. It says that his appearance kind of knocked her back on her heels as well. She was wholly engrossed by her own feelings. And she had some shame and some vexation. Because she was mean to Darcy. Not saying he didn't deserve it. Not saying that he was totally innocent. He was very condescending to her and very presumptive. And but he gives her the letter, and she learns about Wickham and Darcy, and so she's got I was a little too rough on this guy, kind of attitude, and she followed with some silence. There's some awkwardness there. She was embarrassed that she looked like she did, and she didn't want to think that she was throwing herself at him, and this is a really nice house. Hey, handsome man, how are you doing? You remember how you wanted to marry me and I didn't want to have anything to do with you, but I saw your house here and man, I'm really going to reconsider. She didn't want to think that she was being phony, by being there.
Right.
And I think that says a lot about her too.
Well, I think that's right, but I think it's also part of she is kind of starting to regret her decision because she's seeing a little bit of who he actually is, and she doesn't want him to get any idea that she might be regretting what she did. Like, she doesn't want him to think that she's after him. Right. Now that she knows he's not really a bad guy, and she doesn't want to think that she came there like in pursuit of him. Right.
Yes, that's exactly true. And she said something about she wondered what was going through his mind, something like that. And others were praising Darcy's appearance. I think they said he had a nice figure or something like that. They worded it a certain way. And Elizabeth, I think she's now she's seeing beyond the superficial, and she's now starting to admire Darcy's character, his inward appearance, And I think that the seeds for true and genuine affection are kind of starting to bloom here, because Darcy and Elizabeth are both making wise decisions, and they're humble in the sense that they're willing to admit when they were wrong and change their behavior because of it, and based on what they learn. And I think Elizabeth, the fact that Darcy would even speak to her, he said that she thought that was amazing. That kind of testified to his character as well. The fact that he would even speak to her, and not only that, to speak to her, but to speak to her with such civility, and not only to be civil, but to inquire about her family. Never in her life had she seen his manners so dignified, and never had he spoken with such gentleness than on this unexpected meeting. So Darcy, in other words, Darcy didn't say, "I'm going to go find her and I'm going to put on this front." This is all they're both shocked. They're both kind of taken aback here, and this is genuine personality coming out here, right? Which shows genuine affection between both of them, because they're both they're both considerate of the other person, and that's what this surprise encounter does. They don't have time to think and pose and put on a front. They just are, and Darcy's just being nice, and Elizabeth is being respectful and a little humble, and Darcy's being humble too, because that's who they really are. They're good people.
Yeah. Well, that's why this is my favorite chapter. I mean, there's just so much going on, and the scenery is so good, and the interactions are so good. But what I think is interesting here is that we hear more in this chapter about how handsome and elegant he is than we have before. And it's almost like she's appreciating the physical beauty now more that she understands his good character. I think we have to understand that Austen is not saying that it's wrong to admire someone for being beautiful or handsome. I mean, you've got to see past that and the superficial judgment. You shouldn't think someone's a good person just because they're handsome or because they're pretty. But Elizabeth has never been that silly. I mean, she knew he was good looking all along, but he was a terrible person. What I think is interesting here, though, is she's looking at the picture and she's thinking about what a good person he is. And of course, someone can be a good person and not be as good looking, but it's almost like those two things are harmonizing for her. Like he's more handsome because of the character that he has, and I think that's interesting. In this chapter, just how much is said about his appearance, and not in a superficial way, but just in an appropriate, that men and women admire each other's appearance, and that's a good thing. I think it can so easily be twisted to something bad, or it can be lustful, but I think this kind of shows you just the good of it, that they like the way the other person looks. They also like who the other person is. They don't separate those two things.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong, first of all, with being physically attracted to somebody that you are romantically involved with. There's absolutely nothing wrong with me being physically attracted to my wife and her being physically attracted to me. That is that should be there. You know what I mean? That's a necessary aspect of a real romantic relationship. So there's nothing wrong with finding attractiveness. I did find this kind of humorous, though. Now, Evie, I'm not a woman, but I have observed women, and you tell me if I'm wrong here. This is my observation, and this is just based on my observation of women. There's like if I see a pretty girl, okay, I'm trying to think, it's some celebrity or some such, okay. Maybe I can't stand that pretty celebrity's attitude. I don't like her politics or whatever, or she's just real grumpy and witchy or whatever. But I can step back and say, I don't want to be around her, but that's a good looking woman. I can almost like separate the two. She's physically very nice to look at, but personality wise, it just wouldn't work out. Women, and I'm going on my wife here. There's some guy, some guy who could be almost objectively handsome, but be a complete jerk, and she will say that's an ugly man. And I'm saying, well, he's not ugly. I mean, he's a handsome guy. Now you might not like his. She's like, no, I have zero attraction to that guy at all. He's just an ugly guy, and I hate everything about him, you know. And I think Elizabeth here,
Yeah, I think that's
kind
what's
of
going on
starts
here.
to do that. She sees Darcy's character, and she starts to now be more physically attracted to him. And I think women do that. I'm not saying men don't do that. I just think women do that maybe a little on a deeper level than men do.
And it's a good thing to do. It's because women are more perceptive than men are generally.
When it comes to physical stuff, yeah, a guy, pretty lady, pretty lady, pretty lady. You know, that's what's going on in a guy.
I mean, I'm joking, but I think that yeah, there's something to that. Yeah.
A man can be bewitched by a woman's looks, and he can put up with a lot of stuff because she's pretty. You know, she's pretty. But if a woman won't be with a guy just because he's handsome, if he's a bum, if he's a jerk or whatever, and I don't mean jerk in the bad boy kind of way, I mean just a flat out jerk, and then he's ugly, I don't have anything to do with him. And on the flip side of that, Elizabeth says, this is a good man. And I used to not think that he was really that attractive, but now I'm starting to feel a little sense of physical attraction for this guy. And I think that's a total woman thing, right?
I think that's really interesting. Yeah, I just thought it was an interesting point, but I think you've explained why this is happening in this particular chapter. Because I think Austen is getting at something, maybe not all women, but I think it's a tendency of women. I mean, I've read so much Austen that a lot.
I'm speaking in a broad, I'm painting with a broad brush here.
But I think it is a general tendency, yeah. She has another character in Emma, Jane Fairfax, who's talking about this man and says, well, I know he's generally thought to be plain, but, you know, where I have regard for a person, I always think they're well looking. And I think a lot of women feel that way. Like, if it's a guy they like, then they think he's cute. If it's a guy they don't admire, I think you're right. I think, well, a lot of women are inclined to think, well, he's ugly. You know, I know he treated people bad. He looks ugly to me. And I've noticed that with some people, where at first you think they're handsome, and then you find out something that makes you think their character isn't good. And then, like, well, his teeth look like vampire. They start to look less appealing to you. I mean, not even like an attractive way. They don't look as pretty. And right. I think that's very interesting how that happens. But I hadn't even thought about that. But like I said, that was just an observation in this chapter, that she's looking at the painting of him. She looks at the big painting of him. She's thinking about his character. But that just goes to show the insight that I think Austen has into the way men and women think. I think that's exactly what's going on here. She's finally sort of free to see him as being a handsome man, because she has gotten past her preconceptions about him.
And she's able to take him in as a whole.
That's right. Exactly.
As a whole individual. More layers of who he is as a man are now starting to kind of come together. And like you said, she is a woman of integrity, and she's not going to compromise to end up with some bum, you know.
Right.
And so she sees that Wickham is a good man. I'm sorry, that Darcy is a good man, and Wickham is not, but Darcy is, and that makes him more appealing to her. And in a general sense, but like you said, now in that physical sense too. Oh, well, these feelings weren't necessarily here before, but based on my new information here, I never noticed how handsome he was. He has a very nice figure, that sort of thing.
Right.
And so you can tell that he's the truth has really made an impact on Elizabeth. And I like how it says she wondered what he was thinking, you know. And she cares about his mind and his thoughts, not his estate. You know, that flutter of temptation. Oh, this estate is nice, but I'm going to put that out of my, this all could have been mine, you know, but I'm going to put that out of my mind. But now, you know, things have changed, and she wants to know what's going on in here with the man Darcy, who she is now starting to have respect and affection for. And what manner he thought of her, and what does he think of her, and whether, in spite of everything, did she still mean something to him? You know, she's starting to think that way too, and she's starting to feel something for him. And that whole typical, well, does he like me? You know, did I blow my chance here? You know, what and I like that Austen put it, whether it was pain or pleasure, Elizabeth knew not which, but she did feel something, and something beyond just reproach, for
Yeah.
Darcy. And she does feel something, whether it's pain, like regret, I missed out on this, I had my chance and I blew it, or I really have affection for this guy. He's a good guy, somebody I could really see this is the kind of guy that I could see myself with. And she's starting to actually, this is her genuine affection is starting to bloom for Darcy here.
Yes.
And then they take this walk around the estate, with her aunt and uncle. And Elizabeth notices Darcy's civility. He's going out of his way to be polite and civil. And she notices because, and again, that's just who Darcy is, He's not that gruff and awkward guy. Maybe he has those little flashes every now and then, but this is who Darcy really is. And it's not a coincidence that this is all happening in his home. His home represents him, who he is at his core as a man. And she notices all of this. And she asks herself, why is he so different? Why didn't I see this guy before? You know what I mean? Where was this guy earlier? From what can this proceed, this change? And then she says, it cannot be for me. It can't be for my sake that his manners have softened. My reproofs at Hunsford could not work such a change as this. It's impossible that he should still love me. But I think that's exactly what it is. Don't you? He listened to what she told him, the criticisms of him that she levied his way, and he took those to heart. And he said, you know what? I do need to make some changes to my character. And I do. She says that it couldn't have been me that prompted this, but I think it was. What do you think?
I think it was too. I mean, and you're saying, well, this is who he is. I think that's right. But I think he realized that after she reproved him, his manners were not reflecting who he really was. And I think for Jane Austen, it's important that we be sincere, that we be authentic, but at the same time, you have to make an effort with people. You have to use good manners. And that's why I really like that. To me, a metaphor of this stream coming in front of the house where she says it's been enlarged, but not so much that it's artificial. And I think that's her ideal of good manners. You enlarge yourself, you make an effort to care about other people, but at the same time, you shouldn't be artificial. You should be who you are, but not just, the unconstrained, I'm going to do whatever I want, I'm going to say whatever I want. We have to discipline ourselves.
Yes. We
have to be who we are, but we also have to be the disciplined version of ourselves. And I think in a way, Darcy has had to learn that, that he's got to expand himself. He's got to make an effort to be friendly to people, even though he naturally is an introvert and this doesn't come natural to him to know what to ask and how to talk to people. But he's realized he needs to do that to be the best version of himself, to be the person that he actually is. You can't just always do what's most comfortable to you at that moment. And I think he's learned that.
Yes, and two things I want to mention here. You're exactly right. Not just to be who we are, but be who we were meant to be. Because if I just stay who I am, I'm not growing. And that's I can be true to myself and grow and mature. And Darcy is doing that here. Okay, and then secondly, that's what good women do for men. They smooth out those rough edges. And these beastly qualities that men have, they, I hate to use the word tame, but they do civilize men. Women do, good women do. And they motivate a man to soften those edges, to correct those beastly qualities and become less of the beast. That's what the Beauty does. That's why Beauty and the Beast is such a good story, because it's true. It's true. It's a archetypal telling of the Beauty turns the Beast into a civilized man, and this is what Elizabeth's influence on Darcy is showing she's a good woman, and she's doing what God designed women to do, and not to change the man, to mold her, not, women. I want to change him, and they want to change men. And see, that's a natural inclination of most. I'd say all women, but that's a broad brush. I don't know, but women always want to change their men, and see. They want to change this is where the bad part of it. They want to change men to be the man that she thinks he should be, not necessarily the man that God designed him to be, and women, I want to change him, and I can manipulate him, and that sort of thing. And women kind of have that tendency, and, bad women.
At their worst.
At their worst, yes.
Right.
Not everybody, obviously.
Yeah.
but not obviously. I shouldn't have to say that, but obviously not every woman's looking to manipulate a man. But that's what women were designed by God to do, to come alongside the man and bring out help him become the man that God made him to be. And that's what good men do for women. They provide good influence on women too, and help them become the woman that God made her to be. And that's what Elizabeth is doing to Darcy here. This is what it looks like in the real world. Even this is a story. That's what fiction is. It's how you apply principles to the real world. And that's what Elizabeth is doing. Darcy is minimizing the beastly qualities. He's not becoming a puppy. He's still, a man. But he's less beastly, more civilized, and I just really think that's what a good woman's influence on a man looks like. This is what it looks like here. And Jane Austen does a very good job of showing that dynamic at work.
And I love what you're saying about Beauty and the Beast and how it's an archetype of romantic relationships. But I mean, I think even stepping back, just a good friendship is going to work that way, that you bring out the best in each other, and you do help. I think it's in Proverbs. Iron sharpens iron, and I think your platonic friendships also work this way. It works in a special way in a marriage. I'm not married, but that's my understanding. But I mean, just any relationship that we have, that's a grace in that relationship, that we're going to bring things out of each other, and the love that you have for another person really does help to change them.
That's why I can't
into what they're meant to be, not what you want them to be.
Right. Yeah, exactly. What they are meant to be. And I am not to mold Amanda into my image. She is to reflect the image of God. And I am to help her do that. I'm to be what she can't be, and I'm to be a man and provide what she can't. And she is to do the same for me. That's what I tell people in our church. Men and women, there's a lot of overlap between men and women. But then there's also quite a bit of difference, because men and women's brains just work differently, and there's nothing wrong with that. We have different jobs. They're both equally necessary, but we're designed to do different jobs, and that's fine. I used this example with Brooks one time. He likes watching Duck Dynasty, and Phil Robertson goes out and hunts an animal and brings it in. He likes doing that. And Miss Kay, his wife, she loves to cook. What good is having a cook if there's no food to cook? What good is having an animal if there's nobody there to cook it? They're both equally important, but they're two totally different jobs, and that's what men and women do. We each have the way we impact each other, the way we relate to each other. And it's in totally different ways, but they're both equally valuable. And that's what I tell Brooks. You can't treat your sisters like they're boys, because they're not. You can't be, you can roughhouse with me. I'll roughhouse with you all day long, but you can't do that with Juliet. You can't do that with Scarlett. They're girls, and girls,
right?
You can't expect Brooks to treat him like another girl, because he's not. He's a boy. And that's why you've got to come together, whether you're brother and sister, whether you're husband and wife, whether you're friends. And that's why it's so important to surround yourself with people that compliment you. And I don't mean compliment you like, Evie, that's a nice shirt, or your hair looks nice. I mean compliment with an E, that fits together with you and brings out the best in you, Yeah.
And I really like that example you brought out earlier, like with women, if you know something bad about someone's character, it affects the way you think they look. And that's because, just generally speaking, women are more holistic thinkers. Everything is connected, and where men are more compartmentalized things. And there's a time and a place for both. Like, one,
Yes.
I think you can get in some stereotypes that are wrong, like saying, well, women are emotional and men are rational. Well, that's wrong. I mean, there's situations where a woman is seeing, more to the perceiving more the whole, the bigger picture, whereas a man is seeing only the parts. And there's a time, there's a time and a place where you need both. And that's why you've got to have that communication and the respect for each other, and not think, well, the way I see it is the correct way and this way is the wrong way. Well, they're both incomplete. You need to have them together. And that's, that's just one example.
Oh yeah. And I think that Jane Austen, and that's to bring it back to this, she does an excellent job of what this looks like in real life. Obviously, there's not a beast running around with the woman and the princess, but I mean, that's an archetype, but this is what that looks like in real life. Your beastly qualities that all men are capable of. And he's changing that. His civility, his manners she was taken aback by how polite he was. And that's the beast turning into the prince. That's what it looks like in real life. And that's why fiction is so important, because it shows, it's like Ayn Rand said, if I want to learn something, I'm going to read nonfiction. But to see what principles and values, how they apply to the real world, how they are acted out in the real world, that's the benefit of fiction that nonfiction can't do. You can do that with fiction, though. And that's why stories aren't just stories for entertainment. You get something out of it. It shows you how to apply principles and values to the real world. And Jane Austen does an excellent job of that right here.
Yeah, and a story like this that, I've read it so many times, like probably every year of my life. It's as if it's part of my life experience, in a way, because you've imagined yourself in these different situations. You've gone through sort of the emotions of what the characters are experiencing. And it's a way to get life experience that isn't your own, like you don't have to make all of Lydia's mistakes to learn what there is to learn from that. And I think that is another thing we get out of stories, just being able to imagine ourselves in different situations. And it's like you're practicing what you would do if you were in that situation.
Right.
You're kind of having the experience of being there without the dangers that come from actually experiencing the things. And I think that's really valuable. I think it's the way to, you don't want to rely too much on what you've learned from books and not from real life, but I think you can learn so much from other people's experience of real life that they've put in these stories.
And that's why, if you notice, a large majority of the Bible is narrative. That's large majority. Abraham did this. Moses did this. Esther did this. Mary did this. Jesus did this. Because it's showing you people who have these principles in this way they live their life, and how you live that out in the real world. And that's why narrative is so important. That's why it's such an effective learning tool. Jesus Christ taught in parables often for a reason. Now, did he specifically teach in parables? Exclusively teach in parables? No, not all the time. But if he wanted to highlight a point, what would Jesus do? He'd tell a story, because this is what it looks like in real life. It's not just a grocery list of things you should do. This is how you apply it. This is what it looks like. And that's why narrative is such an effective ethical tool. And anyway, I could keep preaching here, but let's move on. I like how Liz's aunt, she says, I can. She has an opinion of Darcy as well, and she says, I can now say with the housekeeper that though some people may call him proud, I've seen nothing of it. So it's not just Elizabeth being blinded by all the flashiness of the estate and the grounds and all that stuff. This is her aunt who has no interest in Darcy at all. She said, some people said he's proud, but I don't see anything like that. And so this isn't just Elizabeth's opinion. Other people see this too, and I think that Elizabeth's aunt, she's a good source of stability for Elizabeth. And the fact that Elizabeth's aunt notices this about Darcy kind of confirms Elizabeth's opinion here, right?
I think that's right. And you also look at Elizabeth's mother is not really someone that would be a role model to Elizabeth. I feel like her aunt has kind of been that wise female role model for her. And I think it's a big step. It's a big thing for Elizabeth that Darcy gets her aunt's seal of approval, because this is someone whose judgment she knows is sound, someone that she respects, and someone Elizabeth knows that her aunt loves her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she doesn't have any kind of, you know, material interest. She's not going to think better of him because he's so wealthy. This is someone who's older than she is, has had more experience, and Elizabeth trusts her judgment, I think.
And I think, yes, that's an excellent point. And it confirms, Elizabeth says, okay, I'm on the right path here. And they also have a change of opinion about Miss Darcy, you know, Darcy's sister. They thought that maybe she was arrogant as well, but she's just shy, you know. And
I love Miss Darcy.
And Eliza, and a little bit what self-conscious would be. You know, said she was afraid of doing something wrong or whatever. And a lot of people that somebody who's shy, maybe a little bit hesitant, and not as confident, and some people will misinterpret that as arrogance. They think they're too good, you know, to talk to me. You know, look at them sitting over there, not making eye contact. They think they're better, but they're not. They're just a little insecure, and that's, you know, they had that change of opinion about Miss Darcy as well.
Yeah, she sees Jane Austen, I think, she observed so much of human nature, and I think this rings absolutely true, that someone could be like this. I mean, I've definitely been like Miss Darcy. I've seen other people like that, and you also see them being misjudged and misinterpreted. And, you know, I feel like she must have spent so much of her life just observing. She can't have met that many people, but she really, I guess, observed and paid attention and really understood people well, even though, you know, she didn't just travel around and meet thousands of people. She must have known a few people really well and understood human nature from that. Now,
we've realized that Darcy and Miss Darcy's characters are, you know, different than what we thought. Miss Bingley, you know, she's kind of duplicitous, right? She's and then she's kind of catty here. So she's who we thought she was. You know, she kind of proved herself that, or she kind of, you know, maybe she's that way. Then she kind of proves herself to be that way. She doesn't make any changes. She's one of these people that I don't trust you, and I'm going to judge you by your behavior. I don't need to be around you. You know, so that's why it's so important to judge people's behavior. She's here, you know, in this section, she criticizes Elizabeth's dress, her behavior, you know, her person. And she's doing this all out of jealousy, you know? I mean,
and everybody knows it too.
Yes. And see, men can do this and women can do this. Anytime you start tearing somebody down, it's because you're jealous. You want to make that person look bad. And if I'm trying to impress a girl and she thinks some other guy, oh, well, that guy's good at this. He's not that good. You know, he's not that impressive. You know, he's actually this, you know, and so I'm trying to tear him down because I want to look better in her eyes. And that's what Miss Bingley is doing here. She's trying to tear Elizabeth down, but they can all see through it. She's just coming across as catty and jealous and unappealing, right?
Yeah, and you have to feel bad for her, but you know, I'm not sure how much sympathy Jane Austen had for her, but she kind of gets her comeuppance, you know, where she sort of pushes Darcy and it's like, well, I remember when you said we heard she was a beauty, and you said, well, I would as soon call her mother a wit, and we all laughed, and she's wanting to get it in with Darcy, and then Darcy, you know, says, well, you know, now I think she's one of the handsomest women of my acquaintance.
Yes.
Says, she had forced her to say what gave no one pain but herself.
And then he just walks away. Yeah, he sees what she's doing, and he just walks away. And I liked here now, it said that Elizabeth is starting to realize more and more it was evident that he was very much in love with her. You know, she's starting to realize that she didn't blow it with Darcy, that he is doing all of this because of her. And so things are looking really good here, you know, but then that pursuit of Darcy gets put on hold when the Bennets receive some shocking news about Lydia and Wickham. And Lydia, now, all right, Evie, I want to make sure I got the details correct here. Lydia runs off with Wickham, and they shack up for 2 weeks before they elope or before they get married. Right?
That's right.
I have the
That's right.
details correct there. Okay. And so she does this. And of course, back in this day, living with somebody before you got married was a big taboo, right?
Right. Right.
I mean, this brings shame on the family here, and her whole
For
family.
the woman,
Yeah.
particularly.
Yes. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second too.
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth discovers that Wickham is a man of poor reputation, so she's seeing
Mm-hmm.
people for who they truly are. Darcy's a man of good reputation, although he didn't come across that way. Wickham
Yeah.
is a man of bad reputation, even though he came across kind of shiny on first impression, right? He left many debts behind that Darcy covered without fanfare. You know, he didn't run around telling everybody of all his good deeds. He just did it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And Elizabeth, so this happens, and Elizabeth now does she kind of start taking some blame for herself on herself here, because I realized who Wickham was, but I didn't speak out soon enough against him, and so I'm partly to blame here. And then she says, had his character been known, this could not have happened. If I had said something about his character, we could have avoided this problem. Had I known, had I made his character known, we could have avoided this. And so she's kind of taking some responsibility here, right?
Yeah, but I actually think she's wrong about that, because you look sort of the earlier chapter where she's trying to make the decision of should she come out and tell everybody what she's learned about Wickham. And I think that the reasons she had at the time are correct, because she could have told all her sisters, she could have told Lydia, well, this is not a man you should trust, but Lydia would have had no reason to believe her. Right. Elizabeth by no means should have disclosed that story about Georgiana Darcy. And, without the details, without a reason to trust the person, Lydia wouldn't have believed it. And if she told Lydia, Wickham is a man you should avoid, it, could very well have driven her to seek out Wickham all the more. That happens sometimes too. So, I mean, I can see why the character is thinking that at this point in the story. I'm not sure we're supposed to take that too seriously. I don't think we're really supposed to blame her. It's not her fault.
She's that type of person, though. Elizabeth is going to take responsibility. She truly
cares for her sisters. Like she really has that care for Lydia that her father doesn't. Yes. Like she doesn't necessarily like being around Lydia, but I think she really loves Lydia.
Right, and that's because that's her family, and she's responsible.
Yes, she's really upset about what's happened.
She understands that sense of responsibility, that family.
Yes.
Person. Whereas Mr. Bennet, he eschews all that. And that discovery of character, we mentioned that earlier, that's a theme in this whole book, but it's really a big theme in this section of the story, seeing past the surface of and seeing past our preconceived notions for who people at their core truly are. And people will prove who they truly are. If you watch them long enough and you gather enough information, men like Darcy will prove themselves to be good men. And men like Wickham will prove themselves to be phonies. You just got to watch them for long enough, and don't just make these snap judgments and take it as absolute fact. And one thing I really thought was kind of sweet here, Darcy stays by Elizabeth's side, as she's distraught over this whole thing. He's trying to console her, and this proves his affection here. He's sharing in her distress. He's got genuine concern for her. This doesn't involve him, but he's there with her to provide her with some help. And I think Austen said it was at this point that Lizzie realized, not that Darcy was just a handsome guy. She realized that now, but it was at this point that she realized that she loved Darcy, and because she never had he so honestly felt that she could have loved him as now. When all love must be in vain, if gratitude and esteem are good foundations of affection, Elizabeth's change of sentiment will be neither improbable nor faulty. So she's realized now, I really have deep affection for this guy, because I've learned who he truly is, and he's proving who he truly is. I'm in a bad way here. I'm in a spot of need, and Darcy is consoling me, and he's taking care of the poor in a different way. She's in need of emotional support, and he's doing that. He sees that she needs him, and he's there for her. And she says, I love this guy. And what do you think?
Yeah, I was wondering reading through it this time, like in this story, it seems like an interruption to sort of their romance, like things are kind of getting rekindled and everything's going smoothly, and then this happens. I sort of feel like, does it actually speed things along? Because she is very dramatically confronted with what her feelings are, and you kind of wonder how much longer it might have been drawn out and she would have denied this, or you almost feel like this thing that seems to be a wrench thrown in is actually sort of accelerating them.
Yes.
Toward, that,
I agree.
That was something I was wondering reading through it this time, that I think she confronts and admits her feelings a lot sooner than she would have if something had happened to make him seem unobtainable.
Yes. It didn't give her a chance to talk herself out of it.
True.
It laid all the evidence right there on the table, and that's what, and again, I know we're talking about fiction here, but that's why God allows these speed bumps into our lives,
Yes.
To prove, because like you said, that's one of the silver linings here. He proved his true affection for her. So this did speed along the process. It wasn't just some montage of running through the fields and kissing and hugging and rolling around in the flowers and that sort of thing. Something bad happens, but it does solidify her love for Darcy, because that's the people that you can trust, the people that are there for you when you need them, when you're in a low spot. And if somebody doesn't bail out on you, that's a person that you should welcome in your life, because phony people will bail out on you in a second. As soon as you become a liability to them in some way, they will dump you like a bag of dirt. But if there's somebody who's there with you and they're willing to share in your distress, what does Darcy get out of it? What benefit does he get out of any of this? I mean, just on a superficial, nothing. But he's there because he has genuine affection for her, and she realizes that, and Darcy proved that. And so that's a good lesson for life too. That's how the people who genuinely care about you, they're there for you when you need them. And Darcy proves himself here.
Yes. And one thing I like about it too, that I mean, I think Jane Austen is not heavy-handed with like a Christian worldview. I've read other books that I enjoyed very much, but the author would like make it clear this was Providence causing this to happen, and that can be a good book too. But I think that this is better because it's kind of more subtle. Like it was really something I didn't think about until reading through it again. That this is how Providence works a lot of times.
Because often Providence, often Providence is subtle. In real life,
and you think it's bad, you think something bad just happened, and it actually has just led you right into the thing that you needed. And I really do believe that is what Austen is depicting here. I think that's the worldview,
and I think that's true to life, like you said.
That's
absolutely. That's what makes it good and real. It's true to life. And so Elizabeth I like what this is a realization that Elizabeth realizes about Lydia. And again, this sums up Lydia's character perfectly here. She never had any partiality for Wickham. She just liked him because he showed her affection at the time. And he was trying to manipulate her. He married her for money. He saw her as a retirement plan or whatever you want to call it. I mean, right? That's why Wickham got hooked up with Lydia, right? I mean,
well, I think a big part of it was, you look at that conversation with Elizabeth, their sort of last conversation, where Elizabeth, without confronting him or having a scene, sort of makes clear to him what, I know who you are, and I know who Darcy is. And it says basically they parted probably mutually hoping never to see each other again.
Right.
I think he, in part, was trying to get back at her.
Oh, really?
And at Darcy. I think that was part of his motivation. I think it was malice towards Elizabeth and possibly also towards Darcy.
Wow.
I don't know. We'll never know. He's a fictional character, so and there's maybe no real answer here. But
I really don't care to find out what Wickham's motivations are. He's a bad guy.
I don't think that he had like a sincere affection for Lydia. No. I think it was a convenient thing to do at the time. He had to get out of town because he had these debts, and he might have been killed or something. There's no telling, gambling debts and whatever. He had to get out of town, and here's a pretty young girl wants to go with him. Fine, that's a fun thing to do for the time. And he's not thinking ahead.
Right. he's thinking in the moment, and what serves me, not what's best, what serves my superficial needs at the moment or whatever. And Elizabeth realized that she was convinced that Lydia had wanted only encouragement, to attach herself to anybody, is how Austen frames it. Anybody who's willing to show her encouragement and affection, that's who Lydia's going to go with. She's going to use that person and ride that horse for as long as that horse can take her. As long as that man's showing her affection, that's who she's going to be with. And the minute that person stops, she's going to find somebody else. And Austen said sometimes one officer, sometimes another had been her favorite, as their affections raised them in her opinion. So whoever was showing her the most affection, that's the man who was in high esteem in Lydia's mind. Her affections had been continually fluctuating, but never without an object. And this is one way that women objectify men. They always act like, you always hear men objectifying women and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, that happens, okay?
Oh, yeah.
Women are just as capable of doing it. They do it in their womanly way, and Lydia is objectifying Wickham here. Lydia is objectifying Wickham here because she's using him for what she wants to get out of him. A man
and all the other officers too.
Yeah. She wants their affection and attention, and she wants to feel
what
important.
They can do for her.
Yes, and guys, see, a bad guy is going to take advantage of that, and a bad girl is going to take advantage of that. And I'm going to use you for what I can get out of you. You know, the girl's going to say that, and the guy's going to say, yeah, well, I'm going to use you for what I can get out of you. And then that's how people get hurt. And that ruins lives. It has the potential to. And
it does.
Elizabeth, they said that Lydia was too wild to be at home. And Elizabeth, she kind of chalked this up to the Bennet family dysfunction. You know, a family so deranged. A father absent, a mother incapable of exertion and requiring constant attendance herself. And that's the Bennets. That's the state of the Bennets right there. And as proof, when it came to Lydia's elopement, Mrs. Bennet's main concern was clothes. You know? In a letter to her brother, Mr. Gardner, Mrs. Bennet wrote, "I'm in a dreadful state. My daughter has run off. She's living with some guy. They're bringing great shame on the family, and I'm in a dreadful state. Okay, I understand. I'm frightened out of my wits. I've had such trembling, such flutterings all over me, such spasms in my side, pains in my head, and such beatings in my heart that I can get no rest by night or day." Oh, wow. Okay, I understand. "And tell my dear Lydia not to give any directions about her clothes until she has seen me." Yeah, that's what she's worried about. Don't do anything with the clothes, Lydia. That's the message she wants her brother to send to Lydia. Don't pick out any clothes until I'm there, because that's what she's concerned about. And she doesn't know where the best warehouses are. And that's what Mrs. Bennet is concerned with. And I think it was Mrs. Gardner, I think, that said this of Lydia, and kind of the plight of women in general. And Evie, you tell me if you think this is true or not. I can kind of see where she's coming from. I think Mrs. Gardner said this. She said, "Unhappy as the event must be for Lydia, we may draw from it this useful lesson. The loss of virtue in a female is irretrievable. That one false step involves her in endless ruin. That her reputation is no less brittle than it is beautiful, and that she cannot be too much guarded in her behavior towards the undeserving of the other sex." And I think now maybe not today as much, but back then, a man could rebound from something like this, I guess, in a way that a woman could not. That's what she's getting at here. Is that's correct? What do you think about that?
Yeah, and so I think that comes from Mary Bennet, and I actually think those statements were considered to be so obvious to all of them that it was inappropriate for Mary even to say them. Now we read them now, and we read them now, and we think, well, that's actually a good insight. It is a good insight, because our society, we forget a lot of this stuff. But at the time that Mary says it, it's almost like Mary is disconnecting from the actual event. Like, instead of being concerned about her sister, who's a real person, she is immediately jumping to drawing moral lessons from it. Which there's a time and a place for that. But I think context of that scene, that was considered, well, this is not the time and the place for us to draw the moral lessons. We should be, our sister in trouble. But I think you're right. It's like that actually is a correct insight that we lose sight of in our society, and it's unfair, but it is still more true of women than of men. I mean,
I would agree, and I'm not saying it's fair. I'm not saying it's right, but
it's not fair at all.
That's one of those things, And to show you, Mr. Collins opines here on Lydia's situation.
When he's doing the same thing Mary is doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now listen, he said, this is a pastor. This is his pastoral advice to Mr. Bennett regarding the whole
you're saying
Lydia.
this is not the pastoral advice you would give in this.
I would not. And I'm going to let this comment speak for itself. He sends his condolences and his sympathies. Okay, that's good. Mm-hmm. Then he proceeds to tell Mr. Bennett, in light of this misfortune, the death of your daughter would have been a blessing in comparison to this disgrace. It would be better for your daughter to be dead than to have to deal with this disgrace. Then he says, let me advise you, my dear sir, to console yourself as much as possible, to throw off your unworthy child from your affection forever, and leave her to reap the fruits of her own heinous offense. And then he later on told Mr. Bennett, you certainly should forgive them as a Christian, but never admit them in your sight or allow their names to be mentioned in your hearing. Mm-hmm. He's a pastor, mind you. And this is the tone deaf stuff you would expect from Collins.
Well, I think it's worse than that, because I think it's just profoundly un-Christian, right? I mean, it's a fact that people make mistakes, and Lydia has made a terrible mistake. But this story, she would have been better off dead. Well, no, because dead, she doesn't have a chance to repent of her sins. All of this is just deeply un-Christian, and I think Austen is displaying that, especially with, as a Christian, you should forgive her. She's drawing our attention to that exact point, that actually the way we treat women in that particular society, the way they were being treated when they made these kind of mistakes, was un-Christian in the name of a Christian moral principle that, of course, is correct. But the way that these women were being treated, as if you've committed one sin, this particular, one particular sin, you can never be part of society again. We will cast you off from our affection. I mean, where is forgiveness, which is really the heart of Christianity, right? I mean, I think that's the point that's being made here when a pastor is giving this advice.
Now, as a pastor myself, you don't tolerate the sin. You don't overlook the sin. You don't condone what she's done is wrong. You don't condone that. Mm-hmm. But my gosh, all right, let's just take it out of the general realm of Christianity.
Yeah.
He's telling a father to write off your child forever because of this. I don't know what kind of father could possibly do that. I don't care what my children have done. I'm not saying I'm going to approve of everything my children do. They will always be my children. And I will, no kind of father would ever be able to just write off his children like that. But that's what Mr. Collins, if it weren't so, it's so stupid. And it's so, the advice is so bad that it's all you can do. And the reason you can laugh at it is because it didn't really happen. It's fiction.
Right.
But all I can do is laugh and just say, I'm not surprised. When I read that from Collins the first time, I was kind of like, but then I just kind of chuckled at it because I'm not expecting this fountain of wisdom from Collins. It would be really better off if she were dead. That would really be better. I mean,
but that Austen must have heard people saying things like this. I mean, I think she's exaggerating real life and she's making it a joke, but she's making it a joke just exactly to make that point. I mean, that line about, as a Christian, you should forgive her, but you should never admit her to your presence again. I mean, like, that's exactly that's the joke. It's the contrast between, what he professes and what he's actually saying. It's funny because it is so horrible. I mean, you're right. If somebody said that in real life, I mean, as you said, it's extremely insensitive to a parent in a terrible situation. And that's quite apart from the fact that it's wrong.
Especially at that time. Like you said, there's a time to discuss these things. Right there, when you're in the thick of it, is not the time to talk about this stuff. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
That's a conversation later. We'll have that. We'll talk about that later.
Because he sort of adds in there, and I have reason to believe that a lot of this comes from excessive license given to your daughters. Well, that's a true point. And that is like actually the point that a good pastor might make to someone in his congregation, but not at that time and not in that way.
Yes.
Right.
Now, Lydia, I guess he didn't follow Mr. Collins' advice, because Lydia and Wickham returned to the Bennett residence, and not only that, they have lunch. I mean, they sit down and eat and everything, And all right, Evie, Wickham and Lydia arrive with an easy assurance, like they've done nothing wrong.
Yeah,
They don't return like the prodigal son. I'm not even worthy to be your child. Please take me on as a hired hand. I'm not, and then the father, of course, welcomes them back in. Hey,
as the father should.
Yeah, as a father should. But they come back without 1 ounce of remorse. They come back. She said, easy. And this was enough to provoke anger even out of Mr. Bennett. And Elizabeth was disgusted. And even they were all shocked. And Lydia was still Lydia, untamed, unabashed, wild, noisy, and fearless. She turned from sister to sister, demanding their congratulations. Demanding it. Like people do that today. They celebrate their sins. I mean, when somebody gets knocked up and then they are proud of it, I'm not saying you shouldn't celebrate a life. I'm not saying anything like that. So don't anybody take that the wrong way. But my goodness, have a little bit of tact and realize, you know what? We can pick up the pieces and move forward and make this right. But don't celebrate the fact. Act like Lydia, like you've done nothing wrong, or whatever. And when at length they all sat down, she looked eagerly around the room, I should say. She took some notice of some little alterations here or there. She observed with a laugh. It's been a great while since I've been here. Yeah, just completely morally clueless. She does not know how to read the room here. Complete. What word would be the best word to describe Lydia here?
Oblivious.
Oblivious to the damage that she has caused. Because it's all just a fun time for her. Because why? She's the center of attention.
That's a good point.
Right?
That's a good point.
She's the center of attention. Good attention, bad attention. I remember, and this is an old phrase. I forget what it was. Vince McMahon, the owner of the WWE, something was going on, and he said, there's no such thing as bad press. You get the name, your name's out there. Any press is good press, because it gets your name out there and makes people aware that you're there and you're putting on a show or whatever. And Lydia here, I'm the center of attention. Not for any good reason, for all the wrong reasons. But I'm the center of attention. I don't care. And that just shows tone deaf, immaturity, a lack of wisdom and morality. And she's just so self-centered. I mean, you take it over from here. I got nothing good to say about Lydia or Wickham.
No, I think that's right. I mean, she hasn't learned from her experiences at all. one thing I think is interesting. So the previous chapter, the mother, Mrs. Bennet, was talking about, well, maybe we can get this house for them so they can live near here, or we can get that house. And Mr. Bennet makes the comment, well, into one house in this neighborhood, they will never be admitted, and they will never be admitted in this house. Well, the very next chapter, I think,
Yes.
he's admitted them. It's like he starts off with some sort of principle, but he can't stick to it.
Right.
His wife just begs to have them come visit, and he allows them in. And that's not to say that he shouldn't. I think that Austen may have kind of been making the point that he should have maybe taken a little firmer stance. Like
Yes.
maybe asked for her to show some sign of repentance before you're welcome back in the fold, but you need to show some sort of contrition for what you've put us all through. But he doesn't, take any kind of stand on that. He starts off like, well, they're never going to be admitted in this house. And then he immediately backs down because he doesn't want to fight that battle. He's not willing to fight any kind of battle.
There's a complete lack of complete lack of shame and a complete lack of moral awareness going on here by primarily Lydia Wickham and Mrs. Bennet, because they're trying to act like this is all just normal. They seemed, each of them, to have the happiest memories in the world. Nothing of the past was recollected with pain, and Lydia led voluntarily to subjects which her sisters would not have alluded to for the world. Only think of its being 3 months. It's been 3 months since I've been here, Lydia cried. It's 3 months since I went away. It seems but a fortnight. Oh, it just seemed like yesterday. I declare, good gracious, when I went away, I'm so sure I had no more idea of being married till I came back again. Though I thought it would be very good fun if I was. Because that's what
what a joke. What a joke.
All just fun. It's something to do. And they don't take that's all this is. That's what attention seekers do. It's just for fun. It means nothing. There's no gravity to it. You know what I'm saying? And that's when you start disrespecting things that should be held sacred.
I love the part too where they're about to go into dinner, and the practice is you go in order of rank. So like, I guess probably the mother and father would go first, then the older sister would go. And so the tradition would have been that Jane goes in first because she's the oldest sister. And then Lydia makes a big point of, well, I outrank you now. I get to go in front of you, Jane, because now I'm married. I've moved up to the head of the line now.
That aggravated me. And that's when when you've established a good character and you're a good writer. That aggravated me to no end, and
she's proud of herself.
She did a very good job of creating that character, and she got her intentions with that character succeeded 100%. So I give credit to Jane Austen for that, because that made me mad. You know what I'm saying? Just a complete lie.
Oh, I know.
It's an immature. Lydia's so immature and dangerous. She's dangerous in her immaturity. And she's got this dangerous view of marriage. It's destined to fail, Evie. And the reason this is so frustrating is because people do this sort of stuff all the time. People do this sort of thing with marriage all the time. They approach marriage in such a cavalier way. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. We'll have some kids, 10, 15 years, we get divorced, and there'll be no consequences. There always are. She doesn't, Lydia's just so focused on herself. And then I this little note here. The voices of sanity are unpleasant to Lydia in her irrational ears. She said, my uncle and aunt were horrid and unpleasant all the time I was with them. They were horrid and unpleasant. It wasn't you. They weren't giving me the attention that they should have, and it's their fault. And that's how Lydia sees it. I used to be a school teacher, and I remember this kid, I had him send him up at the front of the class, and because he was just he wasn't a bad kid, but he was just rowdy, and I was constantly having to redirect him, and he came up to me. I was in the 7th grade, and he was in the 8th grade next year. He walked by my class. He was like, hey, Mr. Trisler, he said, you remember when you used to get on to me for nothing? And I said, yeah, I got on to you for nothing. I just picked you out one day and decided I'm just going to hassle this kid. You didn't have any role in it at all. And that's a typical attitude of an 8th grader, or a 7th grader. He's getting on to me for nothing. I'm not doing anything wrong. But that's what he thought. And that's what Lydia thinks here. The problem's not with me. The problem's with those two old fogies, those two old codgers. They were
Yeah.
just so horrid and rude and unpleasant. And she's so superficial. She's thinking about Wickham's clothes too, his blue jacket or something or other. She's not thinking about his character. And Wickham's affection for Lydia was just what Elizabeth expected, how she expected to find it. Wickham did not have as much affection for Lydia as Lydia had for Wickham. And
Yeah.
Lydia, she even had the gall. And that's what you were talking about with Jane. And this was just obnoxious gall and audacity. I take your place now, Jane. You must go lower than me because I'm a married woman. And then she goes on to tell her mother, I am sure that all my sisters must envy me.
Brazen.
Yes. Oh my gosh, Evie, I was so. If I were Elizabeth, I would get up and put some sort of wrestling hold on my sister here and just, you stupid fool, you immature, ignorant fool, and that's what she just wants the attention, and she wants people to be envious of her. And she took satisfaction in the envy of other people. I want other people to sin, to be envious of me. And there's a difference between wanting to be respected. I'm not talking about being respected because you've earned it. I'm not talking about that. That's good. I'm talking about, I want people to wish they were me, and I get satisfaction knowing that other people are envious of me. That's just, it's terrible. It's a terrible way to live life. And she has that. Your own sense of happiness is not independent if you base your happiness on other people. If you need other people to be happy about yourself, that's what I bring up Ayn Rand again. I brought up Jordan Peterson twice. I'm going to bring up Ayn Rand twice. That's what she calls secondhand living. You have to live. You have nothing of your own.
Yeah.
That makes you content. You need to have power over people, or you need the approval of other people to feel good about yourself. That's what she expertly called secondhand living. Firsthand living is, I'm happy in myself. I'm content in myself. I know I did a good job. Whether nobody else recognizes it or not, God does, and I do.
Yeah.
And I'm happy. I don't need other people to tell me I did a good job. I don't need other people's approval. I don't need other people's envy. I'm happy in and of myself. And Lydia is so far in the opposite direction. She has no independent sense of happiness. She needs the envy of other people. What do you think here?
No, I think you're right. And it's an attitude of either I want to have power over other people, where they envy me, or I let other people have power over me. And that's not right. I mean, then that's not the same thing as like respect for the law or respect for legitimate authority. It's letting other people dictate our own self-worth, and that's not right. That comes from God. Our worth comes from God's love for us, and not what somebody else thinks.
Right.
Whether other people envy us or whatever it is.
I like Elizabeth.
But Lydia has no sense of that, because it was that the father's love that might have modeled God's love for her as a child. She did not have that. I mean, it goes back to Mr. Bennet's failings, or I think at the root of a lot of this problem with Lydia, that she wants that attention. She wants that envy of other people because she doesn't have that firm sense of self-worth that would come from being unconditionally loved.
She doesn't have that self-respect. She hasn't earned it. She
That's
doesn't
right.
have it. And Elizabeth does.
Because no one has taught her that.
Right, exactly. So I mean, it's a twofold problem there. The parents
really
didn't do their
yeah.
job, and everybody, there are people who've had bad parents that turn out to be really good people.
That's true.
So Lydia, she has her faults, and her parents are at fault too. I mean, they're both there's both plenty of blame to go around there. And Elizabeth does the right thing. She could bear this no longer. She got up and left the room and returned no more. She didn't create a big dramatic scene. She didn't start hurling insults. She just, I refuse to be a part of this. Everybody's acting like everything's okay, and it's not. And I refuse to be a part of this, because she's a woman of character and integrity and self-respect. And she said, I can't in good conscience sit here and act like everything's okay. So I'm not going to be mean. I'm not going to be rude. I'm just going to leave. And I thought that was the mature and wise thing to do. And being a bigger sister, she said something to Lydia later on. I don't like the way that you get husbands, or something like that. I think
Yeah.
she said something like that to him. And so
Yeah.
she stands firm in her integrity. She wants to marry for the right reasons and do it the right way. Unlike Lydia, Lydia just wants the attention, and eventually that marriage is going to crumble and fail. And later on, we're going to wrap up here. Later on, we find out that Darcy, he had tried to help make the situation better for Lydia, right? That all the damage that she was causing, and she was bringing a lot of shame on her family. He sought to restore Lydia's dignity. And
Yeah.
all of this for the sake of Elizabeth, because
Yeah.
he loves her. He found Lydia absolutely resolved on remaining where she was. She cared for none of her friends. She wanted no help of his. She would not hear of leaving Wickham. And this is sad but true. You can speak wisdom and truth to people, and you can reason with them all day long, and they can know and understand what you're saying is right. But if some people don't want to accept the truth, they don't want to change their circumstances, they're not going to do it. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And that's what Lydia does. Darcy tries to reason with her, and she refuses to be reasoned with. I will not. I'm going to stay right where I am. And that's almost a sense of hopelessness that comes with that, because
Mhm.
you want to try to change somebody, but if they don't want to be changed, they're not ready to change. They're not going to.
Yeah.
And so Darcy tried, and that's all good people can do. Sometimes people like Lydia have to learn for themselves.
He had done his duty, and it was up to her to make her own decision. And it also does show the level of his regard for Elizabeth, that he
Mhm.
would subject himself to having that conversation with Lydia, because that was unpleasant.
Yes. Any sort of conversation with Lydia would be unpleasant to me, but he
Mhm.
did it strictly for Elizabeth's favor, or her benefit. And he tried to find as honorable a solution to this problem as he could. She chose to
Yeah.
remain, hidebound in her rebellion, and she didn't care about her family. She only cared about what she wanted. And Wickham was the same. Wickham still, he's no different. It's not like he's just along for the ride here. He's, like we mentioned, he's using her just like Lydia is using him.
Oh,
Marriage
yeah.
was just like an arrangement for Wickham, something
Mhm.
to, like you said, something to do. And we'll wrap it up here with the I think it was Mr. Gardner's letter. He wrote a letter to Elizabeth here, right? Was
I
it
think it
Mr.
was Mrs. Gardner.
Was it Mrs. Gardner? One of the Gardeners, I believe. And
Well, Lydia let slip that Mr. Darcy was involved, and so Elizabeth first gets
yes,
that
yes,
Mr.
exactly.
Darcy has something to do with it, and so
Yes,
she writes to Mrs. Gardner.
and Darcy didn't, want his he didn't want his name brought into it, because he's not looking for
Right.
glory. He's just trying to make things right.
Yeah.
And they mentioned here how much they liked Darcy. His behavior
Mhm.
to us has in every respect been as pleasing as when we were in Derbyshire. The same guy he was
Mhm.
there is the same guy he is here. That's
Mhm.
because that's his character. His understanding and opinions all please me. He wants
Mhm.
nothing but a little more liveliness. He wants of nothing but a little more liveliness, and that if he marries prudently, his wife may be able to teach him that. Again,
Mhm.
he's got some little tweaks, but you put him with the right woman, and she'll, smooth out those rough edges and help him grow into the man that he's supposed to be. Um,
Mhm.
and he hardly ever mentioned your name. He said he was very sly, but slyness seems to be the fashion, and Elizabeth's response is that her heart did whisper that he had done it for her. So she realizes here again, Darcy was there for her. And this is a total man thing to do, and
Mhm.
sometimes women criticize men for this. And I understand it can be annoying. I understand that. But Elizabeth's sitting there crying, and she's got a problem, and Darcy wants to go fix the problem. Sometimes women just want to, I got a problem at work and I just want to gripe about it. And the man will say, well, why don't you do this or do, and then they get mad. I don't want to solve the problem. I just want to gripe about the problem, and women act like, don't try to solve the problem. I just want to, vent or whatever. But that's what.
See, I always want to solve the problem as well. I guess I may be a little more like a man in that respect. If somebody's got a problem, it's like, okay, well, what are we going to do about that?
Yes, that's where my mind immediately goes. I don't like problems, Evie. I'm not a dramatic guy. If there's a problem, I want it gone and dealt with so that we can just get back to normal, having a good time, And
if there's nothing you can do about it, then what is the point of complaining?
Yeah, that's right. Learn to live with it,
But that's not, because there's men and women on both sides of that. I mean, and it is important at times to listen to people because that is what they need. But yeah, I get your point. We're kind of on a tangent here, but he really does solve the problem. This is a solvable problem.
He does, and he does the typical man thing. He's going to go solve that problem because he doesn't like seeing the woman that he loves all upset, and he doesn't like seeing her family's name being dragged through the mud because it upsets her. And Darcy says, I'm going to go do something about this. And anytime, that's how people's that's what James says in the book of James. Your faith is perfected in your works. If you truly have faith, your works, that faith will come out in the works that you do, the way you think, the way you speak, the way you act. Your faith, if it's true, will manifest itself in that. And Darcy's love for Elizabeth he's doing the work here. His works here are manifested, and his love is manifested in these works. He's trying to make it right for Elizabeth's sake. And Lydia is not anything to him, but it's all for Elizabeth's sake, right? And and I just like the way Austen worded it there. Her heart did whisper. It wasn't this big loud clap of thunder, this big loud sign or anything like that. Her heart whispered, he did that for you. And Darcy didn't want it to come out that he did it, but it came out. And it became clear that they owed the restoration of Lydia, her character, everything to Darcy. And what's that make you think about Darcy there?
Well, I really liked it. He did it just to take care of Elizabeth, not so he would look good in her eyes. Like he doesn't do this and then rush onto the scene and make sure she knows everything that he did so that he'll fall at his feet in gratitude. He doesn't want that. He just legitimately wanted to do something to serve her and didn't intend for her to find out about it. I think it says everything.
Yes, and that's how the affection's real. He's not attention seeking like Lydia. He just wants the people he cares about to be taken care of. And if I've got the means and the wherewithal to do it, I'm going to do it. And Darcy he's a good man. And Elizabeth sees that now. All right, so this is where we're going to stop off. Wickham and Lydia leave, okay? Bingley and Darcy arrive. And this is where things really kind of come to a head with Jane and Bingley, and then Darcy and Elizabeth. And then old Lady Catherine makes her presence known too. We're going to talk a lot about her and Elizabeth's little interaction there. There's a lot to go through on that, and we'll pick that up in the next episode. So, Evie, do you have any closing thoughts or anything you want to wrap us up?
No, just this is really my favorite part of the book, and there's just so much there. I think this is just where the story really reaches its high point, where you have these two really are in love at this point in the story. They have that true love and affection for each other, and from here it's just, well, how is it going to turn out? It's a wonderful book. It's
such a very well written book. It's a well told story, and everything logically makes sense. This book was a pleasure to read, and it's a pleasure to go through and discuss. All right, we're going to wrap it up there. We're going to have one more episode, our fourth episode on Pride and Prejudice, and we'll wrap that up, wrap up the book next time. Evie, I really appreciate all your insight. You've got some really good insight here, and so thanks for all your insight here. It's really good. I've enjoyed talking about this with you, and I look forward to the next one. Yes. All right. We will see you all later. Y'all have a great day. Keep reading good stories. They're like friends. The stories you surround yourself with will impact your life for the better or for the worst. So, make sure that you surround yourself with good stories like this one. We'll talk about the end of this book next time. Y'all take care. Have a great day.